Hello and welcome back to the Airpig Deep Dive series. Today's video is going to talk about game entities and rigs, which are the sort of foundation of all game entities. So I'm going to go ahead and load up my demo project here. And we've loaded into map view, so we're looking at a sample map that I have. We're going to switch over to rigs, and we're just going to be talking about rigs today. We may touch on a few other things to kind of show off how rigs are used, but mostly we're going to talk about how to create and set up a rig. So let's start by talking about what a rig is. We're looking at a very simple bush rig right now. If you go back to the history of kind of how 2D games were created, most of the art was pixel art and it was frame animation. So that means an artist would draw each frame of an animation in the same way that older Disney movies were made. And then those frames are stitched together to form an animation. The good side of frame animation is you can be really creative with it if you're a great animator. And it is very pure to the origin of the game development style, meaning you're doing real pixel art, you are drawing the pixels every frame. When 3D graphics began, you started having skeletons and rigs. And the way that works is a skeleton basically is a place that you can attach geometry to, and a skeleton has bones, just like in a human body. And then you attach geometry like arms or guns or armor to those bones, and then you animate the bones and you can actually swap out what is attached to the bones, so if you equip different weapons. And you can bring that same style into 2D graphics, and it's less pure in the sense that you can have rotations and movements that aren't perfectly pixel aligned in the way that pixel animation is. But it is a very, very efficient way to animate because you can reuse one animation for a lot of different things by just swapping out the sprites that are attached to bones. And so let's start by looking at a really simple rig. This is a bush. The bush, it has one bone that's just called trunk, and that bone has a sprite attached to it called bush 2. We could actually move this bone around, and we can rotate it, and we can also set the exact properties on it. We can hold shift to snap to whole pixels. So that is the main thing that a rig is just a set of bones. We can add and duplicate and remove and reorder bones over here. But that's all a rig is it's just bones that are positioned in space with rotation and have sprites attached to them. Rigs also have a footprint and body collision. The footprint collision can be edited, and you can move the points of the polygons around. You can also add more polygons with the plus key, or take them away with the minus key. You can also drag the whole polygon, but the foot collision determines the collision footprint of an object and how a character moving around will collide with that object. And the body collision, which you can also edit, determines both what is clickable, like if you're clicking and editing the map, that determines the clickable area of a rig, and then it's also used for characters to determine damage and whether their body was hit or not. Rigs can be several different types. So this is a prop. A prop is the most basic rig behavior. Props are just kind of a dumb object. They don't do anything special. They just have collision and can be dragged around on the map. The other rig types are containers, which can hold inventory. So like a chest or a crate would be a container. And then a character is the more complex, like fully, like has more robust game behavior. So characters can walk around, they can attack, they can take damage, they can offer quests, they can have dialogue, they move. So the characters are the most complex type of rig. So we've started simple here with a rig that just has one bone. Let's look at a rig that is slightly more complicated. Let's look at our house. So this could be drawn as a single sprite, but this actually has 3 different bones. And let's turn on this bone view again. I didn't mention it, but these little polygons show where the bones are. So we actually have a wall, a roof, and then something generically called decoration, which is actually the door. And I'll explain why that's not called door in just a second. But this is a little bit more complicated rig. It still has foot collision, body collision, and the only real difference between that and the bush is that it has 3 bones. But it's still just a prop, so this doesn't have any specific behavior. It is just a collidable object that you can place on the map. But another really interesting thing with rigs is you can have the idea of rig variants, which is just a rig that has different sprites attached to its bones, and in the case of characters might have different properties like movement speed. So in the case of this house, we're not going to go deeply into variants, but this just shows why rigs are such a cool concept. Here's the default house, but we can also have a red roof with a door, a purple roof with a door, blue roof with a window. So that's why this is called decoration and not door, because we've actually swapped the sprites out. And so we can have red roof with window, purple roof with window. So we have one rig, but it can have a lot of different looks in the map. And we'll show that kind of at the end. Finally, let's go to our most complicated rig in this demo project. And this is a humanoid character. Now this rig doesn't have any clothes because later we'll do a deep dive into items and we can actually equip items to this rig. It also doesn't have any gender. We can put different hairstyles, different clothes types on this rig. And so it's very flexible. This rig has a shadow bone, a hand rear and a leg rear bone, and then that's what the R means, the leg F, and then a body, and then head and hand F. It's important to know that the order of these bones controls rendering order. So the last items in the list render last and are on top. So you see the head is pretty close to the top of the stack, but this hand overlaps the head so that if there's an attack animation, the hand and any weapon that it's holding appears in front of the head. And then we have a couple of indicators that are used for specific animations. We're not going to go too into that. Let me switch over to A Sprite real quick and show you actually the sprites that make up this rig so you can kind of see how the pieces come together. So in A Sprite, here's some of our sprite sets for the rig. So you can see that these are individual head, body, hand, and leg sprites. We have 3 different skin tones, and then we have a skeleton version of this, and then we have a couple of different heads for the skeleton. And so if we animate one of these characters, we can reuse those animations for all of the different types of characters. And actually, real quick, while we're looking at this, you saw the house put together. That house was built out of a wall, a roof, and then a piece of decoration, which was the door in one case and the window in other cases. And then here's some other roof variants. And so the cool part of that, switching back to Airpig, is you can create all kinds of variants that share animation. So in this case, we'll just quickly preview an animation. So this rig has an attack chop animation. And animation is just creating keyframes. So each of these dots on the timeline or little rectangles is a keyframe. And so we've animated this skeleton, but the animation is independent of the sprites that are attached to it. And here's the animation playing. We can actually change the animation speed. Another thing that you can't do with frame animation. So if we wanted this to be really fast, here's like a half-second version, or we can make this really slow, and we'll get smooth frames. There's no relationship between the number of frames in the animation and the art that we've done. We can have any number of frames in this animation. And then the cool thing is we have all these different variants. So we have a couple of different skin tones for the human character, and then we have a skeleton minion, a rusher is just what I called it, but that's just the different head, and then a bruiser. And actually there's properties here that we can set on a per variant basis. But that all allows us to create animations and then reuse them, and you can actually preview the animation. So you saw the animation with the human, there's the animation with the skeleton. It's the same. Also, we're really zoomed in here. So if I turn off bones and set this to a normal duration, you can get a little bit more sense of what that animation looks like. So that gives you a little bit of the idea of the power of rigs. Now if we go to a map, I'll just show quickly how they can be used. Most of what you see on the screen here is a rig. So, and I call these kind of game entities once they're in the game, because the rig is kind of the foundation, but the game entity may have items attached to it, as is the case with these characters, or it may have other special properties. If I turn on collision, you can see all those footprint and body collisions. So these trees are rigs. We can drag them around. They automatically sort as you move them forward and back with the other things in here. We can set a whole bunch of different properties on each instance of a rig. So in the case of this little guy, he is that same humanoid rig, but we've equipped items to him. So the hair is an item, the pants are an item, the shirt is an item. And so you can outfit rigs to be a lot of different kinds of NPCs. And again, I haven't had to reanimate every version of this character. I could have 100 different NPCs in the game that are just slightly different combinations of parts and clothing. And then you can also see this guy has a quest, so he has a little quest marker bouncing above his head, and that was part of the rig. That was this quest indicator in the rig. So, which is actually not showing right now, but you can see the bones up here for it. So that is rigs. That's why Airpig uses them. They are core to every item type in the game. I'll just actually show one more real quick, which is the chest. This has an animation for interacting, which is an open animation. So it pops open. So really you can do any kind of animation with rigs. I've shown a humanoid, but if you want to have characters that were horses or spiders or horse spiders, you can create any number of bones and animate them and then use that in the game. And so there's nothing about Airpig that's specifically tied to human characters or a specific way of walking. It is a very flexible system that if you can imagine it and break it into parts and animate those parts, you can create an animated rig with it. So that's been kind of an overview of rigs. They're fairly simple to create. There's a few different kinds. The behavior that they have determines their behavior in the game. And I don't actually have any containers. Let me actually hop to a map real quick that has a container. So you can see, let's turn off the collision because it's distracting. This is a container rig, and it has inventory, which means when we open that in the game, we'll be able to take these items out of it. And so character rigs can do things like walk around or patrol or be spawned by a spawner. Container rigs can hold items, and then prop rigs are just decorations that you can move around in the game. You can actually flip these as well. None of these really, this one actually will be clearly different. So you can flip it. This one is very directional. And then you can also set the variant. So if we wanted a red chair here instead of a purple chair, that's just a variant on the rig. So you can see that you can design things and then quickly lay out your maps and just drag these items in, and they'll be ready to go in the game. So that is an introduction to rigs and how they work. We will do more deep dives into rig animations, rig variants, attaching items like weapons and armor to rigs, and then how to configure them in the game to do things like offer quests or have dialogue or equip items to rigs. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more deep dives in the future.